Coming up on Tech News today, how the Internet of Things actually changes the permanence of the hardware that we buy. Dan Patterson asks if we love VR or if we just love the idea behind VR. The FCC rolls out nutrition labels for ISPs that no one's going to use, probably. How the election can help businesses with big data and more. Tech News today is next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today, episode 1484, recorded Monday, April 4th, 2016. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron will send you all of the ingredients to cook fresh, delicious meals with simple step-by-step instructions right to your door. See what's on the menu this week and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's blueapron.com/twit. Hello and welcome to Tech News Today. This is the show where we talk about some of the biggest tech news stories with people who are passionate about technology. I'm Jason Howell, and I'm pretty sure that technology runs through the veins of today's guest, Dan Patterson from Tech Republic. How's it going, Dan?
Hey, it's great to be with you, Jason.
It's good to be with you too. It's coursing through your veins, right? These are the people that we try and get on the show.
Something's coursing out.
How about the Tech Republic podcast? That must be coursing through your veins. How's that going?
Yeah, all of Tech Republic is going along pretty great. We have some fantastic coverage areas. As Aaron Carson's hitting the VR thing pretty hard. I'm on the campaign trail doing not the politics side, but the big data around the presidential campaign. So that has been bananas.
Excellent. We're actually going to talk with you at length, I think, in our second segment anyways, about kind of like big data and election coverage and how, I guess, companies can kind of learn from all these things that are happening right now. Yeah. It's really just an insane time right now.
It is.
But let's talk about a few of today's top stories before we get there. That's usually what we like to start off with. First of all, let's see if this scenario rings a bell. Company buys another company and then eventually stops supporting the product that they bought. Very familiar. That doesn't make it sting any less. In this case, Revolve produced a $300 Internet of Things home hub that would do things like control your doors, alarms, and lights, all that kind of stuff throughout your smart home. Google's Nest department bought Revolve back in October of 2014 with terms basically revealing that it was more of an acqui-hire than it was, kind of like offering the existing products. So I suppose the writing was on the wall there that probably the products wouldn't have a long life. That talent was going to be funneled into Tony Fadell's Nest for future products. So it's somewhat unsurprising that the Revolve Hub would someday see an end to support. But in the case of the Internet of Things, of IoT, ending support doesn't just mean you have a hub that's still operational, but doesn't get any more support or firmware updates. Nest, in this case, is actually shutting down the associated service as it focuses more on its Works with Nest program. In other words, the device will cease to work entirely, bricked as of May 15th, 2016, and you can sound the taps in the background as we mourn its demise. What do you think about this? I mean, it kind of speaks to kind of this world we live in right now with hardware, where you're not just necessarily a lot of the times buying a piece of hardware. You're buying a piece of hardware and associated service along with that hardware. And at any time, a company can just choose like, well, we don't have the resources or we don't want to provide the resources for the service. And in doing that, actually kills the device that you paid $300 for. What do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that the Internet of Things is so dependent on, you hit the keyword on the head, support. In fact, last week I spoke to a couple of security experts about this very topic on Tech Republic, Internet of Things security, and every single person I talked to said the number one threat vector for IoT is firmware support and upgrades. You buy a thing, a piece of material, a thing that sits in a pretty critical place, your house, and when that stops getting firmware upgrades but continues to operate, it becomes really insecure. And if we don't have standards throughout the Internet of Things one insecure little device networked to a bunch of other devices can cause a ton of havoc.
So then it sounds like what you're saying is, at least to some degree, that what Google/Nest is doing here is not necessarily something evil or diabolical. Maybe to a small degree it could be interpreted as that. And I think a lot of owners of this, which I don't know if there are many, I don't know if this was a hugely purchased item, so that's probably part of their reason for killing support for it. But maybe Google is kind of doing its users, at least to some extent, a favor here by not allowing something that could ultimately be a security vector into their smart home to stay open.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, it can be frustrating. I really understand and I empathize with people who are frustrated with not just Google, but shutting down things when you've made not just a purchase, but an investment. On the other hand, that investment, if it threatens other things in your home, could be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think this, I feel like this, I'm used to hearing this around Google products. And I don't know if that's because I'm so closely tuned into Google for some of the work that I do on other shows on the network or what. But I mean, is this a Google thing, or is this just the way it is in technology and hardware these days, that when you buy something, you shouldn't necessarily expect that it's going to live on forever and ever? I feel like that's a belief that we've had for a really long time, but more and more it seems, and especially with the advent of things like Kickstarter and whatever, you pour a lot of money into something that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to live forever and ever. Is this just kind of part of the current landscape of technology? We just have to get used to it.
Yeah, I think, it's a spectrum. And, you do have Google at one end of the spectrum, which they do have a culture of people who like to build things. And when you build things and you finish it, you kind of move on. They don't have a good culture of passing the torch. But I don't think it's a binary. I think that there is a big gray area in between the Google way of doing things and what consumers may want, which is, lifetime support. That's not also realistic.
Yeah, no, and I feel like we hear that a lot also with app development, where someone makes a $3 or $4 app and then 3 years down the line decides to make something new and focus less of their time on that thing. And people, rise up and they're like, hey, I paid $3 for this 4 years ago. Why aren't you still supporting it? Turns out I'm not making any more money from it. And it's just, you gotta know when to cut your losses and move on, I suppose. Nothing lasts forever. Now, speaking of Google, with Google I/O approaching fast and furious for next month, as well as what we've heard a lot about on this network over the past couple of weeks, high-profile virtual reality coverage, things like Oculus Rift, which I have sitting right behind me. I have not played with it yet. HTC Vive's commercial releases. Eyes are turning to Google for its take on VR, kind of its broadened take on VR. And it turns out their plan is more focused on augmented reality this time around. Amir Afradi at The Information has multiple sources who say that Google is focusing on AR, augmented reality, in the long run as its market will ultimately be much larger than that of VR. A big reason for this, partially, we keep hearing about VR possibly being kind of baked into the Android operating system in some way, shape, or form. So it sounds like we might actually see a little bit of that coming up at this year's I/O. But the other big part of this is VR is not the kind of thing that you can just use everywhere. And I'm sure a company like Google wants to create things that can be used anywhere a user wants to use them. For example, I have a link in the doc of with I think the caption on this, it's a guy on the train station using a VR, with a controller, and I think the caption was something like, "This is what we have to look forward to in the future of VR." People on trains locked away in their VR goggles. I doubt this is the norm. I doubt that becomes the norm, that people feel comfortable enough to throw VR goggles on wherever they happen to be out in the real world, and that becomes a normal thing. But AR, it's a different story. I don't know. What do you think?
This is it's complicated to approach Google with anything for the reasons we discussed in the previous story.
Fair enough.
And their last take, I think all of us want Google to be so much more than they're capable of executing. The last time Google did something with AR, it was a ridiculous parachute presentation with an arguably pretty innovative product that they just botched obviously I'm talking about glass. They botched everything to do with glass. It was so cool. and they just didn't know how to treat the product properly. So I don't know that I have faith in their ability to treat a product properly this time around. Having said that, we all know the people at Google are smart as hell, and they're capable of developing AR in ways that really do augment real life. There's constantly the conversation about, VR is kind of for play and AR is for work. And that's kind of our take at Tech Republic. Obviously, Aaron's the real expert on this, but AR seems to be the thing that has productivity baked into its core. And Google has so much productivity data, they could just bang out something awesome. At the same time, it just like AR, VR is not here yet. I got the most excited a few years ago when I heard Google was investing in the Warby Parkers of the world. If they can give me something that is not like the funny thing with the guy in the subway with the Samsung snapped to his face, but a stylish pair of glasses that I have to wear anyway, and then shows me useful data instead of distracting data, I think that that's the future of real everyday AR. Until then, it'll be in the enterprise, it'll be in industry, in manufacturing, and a ton of other business, but I don't see consumers rushing out to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like in the AR world, in the world of technology that you strap to your face and then you go out into the public with it, that doesn't exist until it's figured into a form factor that the public is used to seeing and isn't totally different from what they expect to see. It's the Terminator view is kind of what people are hoping for when it comes to AR. Just you put on the sunglasses and immediately you have context around the things that surround you. Man, I don't know how far out that is. I feel like that's pretty far out. I mean, that's miniaturization to an insane level, not to mention the data crunching involved in a small form factor, unless you want to strap a battery pack and some, external CPU to your backpack, which that's not going to work.
These all seem like, look, we know that there is a killer app, a killer purpose for AR, but all of these are kind of problems in search of, or solutions in search of problems. I just don't need it. The best AR I have right now are the glasses on my face. But in 20 years, we will surely develop new problems that require new solutions. And by that point, maybe AR will be small enough to fit in my head.
Sure.
Or nanobots.
Yeah, or nanobots, of course. One can hope. Now, Facebook is, of course, working on this. Mark Zuckerberg has mentioned that Oculus is also working on AR. It's further down the line. Obviously, Oculus right now, Oculus Rift, is more VR focused, and maybe that's just because that's the more attainable goal. And as far as Google's AR ambitions, you've got Leap Motion. They raised over $800 million, well, just shy of $800 million earlier, in February, earlier this year. And there's a lot of money on that one, and that's AR. Absolutely. I just don't know what the form factor of how it's delivered to you, and I doubt it's the kind that you walk into the real world with. But kind of along these lines, Microsoft's HoloLens had a big kind of week at Build. They showed off, to a lot of people, kind of the current iteration of HoloLens, and people were getting really excited about it. You were able to test out a version, I think it was last December. Is it the same version that was shown off as far as at Microsoft Build?
I think it was, or a very similar version. In fact, this was the reporter preview for Build. And of course, HoloLens is a developer preview. It's a $3,000 device, and it's limited to people who were invited to be developers for the platform. So before anybody gets super stoked, you're not going to be buying this right away. Let the developers make cool stuff for it. And people will make cool stuff with the HoloLens. Having said that, the hardware is not here. It's not there. It's just not there. I want it to be. Everybody, I've seen more glowing reviews than I could shake a stick at, but every honest reviewer will tell you it is kludgy, it's big, it is very conspicuous. You are very aware that you are wearing this device. It doesn't last much more than, they tell you 20 minutes. No, it doesn't last much more than 7 minutes. In fact, all of our sessions were based around 7-8 minute sessions. And then we had to take the device off and move to the next station. It is not as sharp as the videos that they're showing you right now. It's just not nearly as crisp. And that's what I found most disappointing about HoloLens. You can see that they're going to get there. They totally are, and it's going to be awesome. But whatever they're showing us in these preview videos, not even close. Not even close. It's like faint little whispers of graphics, and the device gets sweaty. It slides off your face. Look, HoloLens is fine. But anybody who's been feeding you like glowing reviews about this, I don't know what they're on, because it's just not there. It's like it portends the future without being it.
Yeah, maybe it's a review more of the potential somewhere down the line, and that this is a first glimpse into something that kind of confirms what people were hoping for. Yeah, this I believe you had sent me this link of holoportation using HoloLens. So this man's, kind of
cool.
Yeah, it's neat.
But it doesn't do that. I mean, like, it's like HoloLens is like Pink Floyd, right? There was a Pink Floyd line, like, was it love or the idea of being in love? That's what HoloLens is. Like, is it AR or the idea of being an AR? It's the idea right now.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, so I don't know. And I will say, tying back into the previous story as far as like AR in a out in the real world sort of sense, the HoloLens, as you see it right now, is an untethered device, right? So it's not necessarily tethered into a computer. So basically what we were talking about, what we want in the sunglasses form factor so we can be the Terminator, you're looking at it. This is how it exists currently. And this isn't the kind of thing that most people would walk out in the real world. And when it comes to augmented reality, to a large degree, that's, I think that's what people are hoping for, a miniaturized way to bring more context to the world that surrounds them, not just in their office or / studio or wherever they happen to be sitting in front of a computer.
Someday.
So someday, we can only hope. Now, before we move on, you've used other VR, and how would you say, other kind of solutions, VR, AR solutions, how would you say it compares?
The last time I used real VR was the Oculus since, it was a second developer's kit, say 2014. So I'm real excited. I'll be in Louisville with the Tech Republic team in Brooklyn now, but we're definitely going full on VR. But I think it's the Vive. In fact, this past weekend, I hacked together a GPU for my PC. I built a new graphical processing unit for VR specifically, and I think it's going to be the Vive. But we'll see. This definitely isn't VR's commercial year, but it's also the year that it is attainable.
Yeah, there's a fire that's lit under the butt of VR. Sorry. And it's moving right now. It's going to go somewhere, I have a feeling. We just don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what kind of circles it's going to run around in or what sand it's going to jump in to put the fire out, if it ever. Okay, moving on quickly. If you like your nutrition labels because they spell out everything you need to know about what you're about to eat, then you'll probably like the Federal Communication Commission's newly unveiled broadband labels. Home ISPs and mobile carriers are being asked to use the labels in an effort to kind of demystify the complexity of pricing, caps, overage charges, packet loss, all that kind of stuff that's going to make the average person's eyes glaze over. I think the key here, though, is that ISPs are not required to use them. And if there is no requirement to use them, Dan, will they be used?
No.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel, too. I don't know, but do you like what you see here? I mean, it's a valiant effort, I suppose. The FCC encourages the use because it allows for it acts as safe harbor for compliance with its net neutrality transparency requirements. So I guess it takes care of that. I don't know, I understand that it's supposed to make things simpler, but there's so much of it that once I start looking through, it almost feels as confusing, even though all the information's there. Everything you need is right there. But I don't know. What do you think?
It's right. It's the toothpaste style problem. There's so many choices. How do I know if I'm getting good?
Yeah, right.
really what we all want to know, right? I'm paying for a thing, I think, but do I get as good as my neighbor? I don't know. These are numbers.
Yeah,
And yeah, but it's also, I mean, I guess I'd rather have this than not.
for sure. For sure. Now, CenturyLink, Verizon, and T-Mobile USA are part of the committee that actually green-lighted the labels. So you've got, some of the ones, some of the companies behind this that you would want to see there. I just don't know how much you're actually going to see. FCC Chairman Tom Willer says they should being the operative word, result in no surprises after you buy. But again, that's something that I'll believe when I see. We'll see how long it takes for these to appear. And I imagine this thing's going to appear on your website. It's not like you're buying ISPs on the shelf, ISP service on a shelf.
Is it like a plugin I can install with WordPress?
Yes, probably so. Okay, and finally, if you are an Amazon Kindle diehard, this bit of news is for you. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos took to Twitter to tease that an all-new 8th generation Kindle would be announced next week. So if you've been holding out hope for a new Kindle, next week. Details are extremely light at this point. But, a few ways that a new Kindle could be improved. A battery case, supposedly there might be a battery case as part of this. Higher resolution display technology, expanded or expandable storage. And I'm thinking this is probably one of the ones that is almost a guarantee, integration with Alexa, as far as that goes. What do you think? Are you a Kindle user? I feel like Kindle, man, it's the result of a bygone era. That was such a long time ago, even though it wasn't.
Yeah, it might be. I think, boom, Alexa, that's got to be it. And Alexa is such I'm shocked that other companies like Apple haven't repeated Alexa by putting it in the Beats pill or something. It's such a brilliant integration with the speaker. And I think that any way Amazon can get devices into your home and get you feeding AI information, that's the real winner here. Everything else in this Kindle is like, it's just an excuse to put a device into the market with Alexa integrated. And I think that AI is Amazon's next big bet for 100 million reasons. And I think that that's what this Kindle is. It's a way, one more teeny little way to get information into and out of the system. Having said that, I'm also a real big fan of the Kindle. It started as like you said, the kind of proto tablet, right? We all kind of remember 2010 when the iPad was fresh and new and exciting. And before that was the Kindle, which was kind of new and exciting. It was fun to be able to bring your entire book library. I'm a big reader, so it was fun to be able to, take my library with me. And it's still, for me, having a dedicated reading device that lives next to my bed that is more like paper than a blue screen is really important, particularly for travel as well. Having a dedicated device with a dedicated battery, that's important. I don't think that the Kindle is ever going to be the top of mind hot device ever again, but I think that it is going to be the accessible reading device for a long, long time.
Yeah, because people who are really fond of reading, I don't really read a lot of books. I listen to my books in audiobook format. So, I don't really focus, but I read plenty of things on my screen. But I understand the difference between looking at text like it's on paper, like you do with the Kindles, versus looking at text on a screen that's just flashing that bright blue light at you. After a while, it can get a little tiring. Kindle first released November of 2007 for $400.
Wow.
And Kindle did for ebooks. Back then I remember the big thing was comparing everything to the something for this as the iPod was for music or whatever. A really well designed, yes, things existed before it, but this was just really well designed. And strangely, seemingly out of nowhere, Amazon came along and released the Kindle, and everybody had to have one. And it was really well designed. So obviously they're going to continue that legacy as much as possible. I do wonder how many people would rush out to buy a Kindle simply because it has Amazon functionality in it. I think that would be kind of a harder thing to explain to someone why they need that. As I think explaining to someone why they need an Echo can be a bit of a challenge if they haven't already had any sort of exposure to it. It also seems like the kind of thing that once you have it, you understand why It's so awesome. So I need to get me one of those. All right, coming up, Dan, as we were talking about earlier, is following the election closely, but more from the perspective of how big data is driving it. And we'll talk with him about a couple of articles he's written along that tip. But first, let's take a minute to thank the sponsor of this episode, and that's Blue Apron. First and foremost, I love Blue Apron, and I know that I love Blue Apron because every time I talk about them on my shows, I get super hungry. I've made awesome meals with Blue Apron, so for me and my family. So it's very easy for me to stop knowing where I'm at this time and space and just want to eat. Anyways, having said that, Blue Apron, you're going to enjoy it. Not only will you feel like you know your way around the kitchen, but cooking at home means eating healthier, saving money instead of ordering expensive takeout again and again. But you need to know how to, where to start. Where do you start to do this? Blue Apron has you covered for less than $10 per meal. Blue Apron delivers all the fresh ingredients that you need to do just that, to create home-cooked meals, just following their simple step-by-step instructions. Every meal that they send to you can be prepared in 40 minutes or less, so it's not a huge time commitment. No overwhelming trips to the grocery store because they actually send you all of the ingredients in a box for the recipes that you're making. No more sad takeout. Instead of takeout being delivered to your door, you're getting a box full of fresh food, and then you prepare your meals. It's awesome. No matter your dietary preferences, Blue Apron makes it a breeze to discover and prepare dishes, some that you've never heard of, some that are familiar. Spiced pork chops and mashed potatoes with kale. This is where I start getting hungry. English peas and goat cheese, or spring gemelli pasta with garlic sugar snap peas, crispy capers, and soft-boiled eggs. You can do this all right in your own kitchen, right? You may not even know what the final outcome of that recipe looks like. Blue Apron has you covered. They send you all the directions, all the ingredients, and by the end, you look like you are a master chef. It tastes like it, and your food tastes like it too. Cook with ingredients that you've never used: watermelon radishes, yuzu juice, labna cheese. Recipes are between 500 to 700 calories per portion. Delicious and good for you. There you go. Right now, you can get your first 2 meals free just by going to blueapron.com/twit. You want to check out this week's menu and get your first 2 meals free. Just go to blueapron.com/twit. And we thank Blue Apron for their support of Tech News Today. And if you hear that grumbling, that's my stomach. Okay, so Dan, you have your finger on the pulse of this year's presidential election here in the U.S. And specifically, you've been paying close attention to how big data is being used to drive the election. Last Friday, you wrote about how data around elections used to be relatively unstructured, let's say. Later, the kind of data points were added to a database technology. I have to imagine that was a lot of time-consuming manual labor to add that structure to make the data more useful. But things are much different now. It almost seems like election data is kind of on the same playing field as marketing data for business. Explain what campaigns are doing now that's so different.
Yeah, so the first disclaimer for every audience is that we're not covering the horse race itself. We have nothing invested in who wins, and I am personally invested in the most dramatic storyline possible. I've no political horse in the race and never have, never will. That said, this is a fascinating campaign. So data has been structured in the tech world in really particular ways. But when you think about what it takes to win a campaign, it's really similar to the first 18 months or so of a startup. You start with an idea, right? And then a few principal characters around that idea. But the characters have to be pretty competent, right? If you're let's say, a CEO or a president of a new startup, is pretty analogous to the candidate and the staff around that person have to build a ground operation. You have to learn to add people in a real L curve kind of way. And then you have to exploit your environment in order to beat your opponent. And by exploit your environment, I mean, you have to convert customers. You have to get people on board. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had this emergence of traditional, now legacy media, and door-to-door retail politics was the name of the game. In the industry, they call it micro-targeting. This is something that was pioneered really by Karl Rove and the Bush campaigns in Texas, and then later for president. And by micro-targeting, I mean the door knockers who come canvass at your house with the clipboard and they ask you questions, or they put things in your mailbox, or they call you. All of this micro-targeting, all of this outreach previously was kind of unstructured. Names of people, your address, that would all kind of float around. Then came the Obama campaign in 2008 and the Obama campaign again in 2012. And what they did is structure data in ways that are now in 2016 pretty mature. And a lot of companies kind of realized in the tech world as well that, hey, we have these pretty cool open source technologies that we take for granted. One being MySQL, but databasing technology of all sorts really allowed structured data. And in tech, we know what that means, but structured data to be applied to the campaigns. Now, what this data has done is allow micro-targeting to happen on a vast scale. I don't just mean more door knockers. I mean simulations that are run. The Obama campaign in 2012, and now every campaign, every smart campaign in 2016 looks at not just a state, not just a region in a state, but down to the counties. There is a company called L2 that will sell data that is down to, I can look myself up in L2, and it has information that nobody else has about me, including my salary range, my marital status, my neighborhood. Really specific information is being bought and sold about not just specific demographics of voters, but really specific information like who you are and what is likely to convert you from being somebody who is interested in a candidate or a campaign, or you could look at it as a business. You're interested in a product, converts that person into being an active voter. And we saw this play out in Iowa, and then again through the primary process. The Ted Cruz campaign did a great job of buying data and applying it to micro-targeting in a ground campaign. And he won in Iowa. The Donald Trump campaign then saw behind the scenes, they realized what the Cruz campaign was doing, and they got wise. They bought data and started crunching the numbers. Of course, the Clinton campaign has been doing this for a real long time. In fact, they have some of the best minds from Silicon Valley building a data machine on the back end for the Clinton campaign that will really help her do outreach and convert potential voters. So it's been a really interesting trail, pun intended, but seeing the evolution of data from really kind of loose-knit, we don't know who you are, we might, to now they know exactly who you are and exactly what you might do. It's fascinating.
Where is this data exactly being pulled? Because I mean, the door knockers, as you were saying, like, which by the way, feel like I have not seen in a really, really long time. I remember when that was a thing, and I feel like that never happens anymore because obviously it doesn't have to. But
where you live in California,
maybe that's it.
Talk to somebody from Iowa or New Hampshire.
Okay, fair enough. That's probably exactly it. But where is that specific data coming from? You're saying, information that you didn't even know was out there, and you're finding it on these databases. Is that coming? I mean, is there any kind of crosstalk with like ad networks that are selling information about people, or like? Where's that data coming from?
Yeah, some of it comes from advertising network. A lot of it comes from the company. I'm indexing, I'm profiling every company that is involved in political data over the last few weeks at Tech Republic and the upcoming weeks. And the company we just spoke to, NGP Van, they work on the Democratic side, but there are analogs on the GOP side, and they added data from the door knockers, from canvassers, right? They would take this data and then really add it to databases and then refine it and cross-tabulate it with stuff like social media data, any type of loyalty cards that you may have used or purchased in the past. That's how they get a lot of your salary range. Right. And then that information can be cross-referenced in really specific tools. There's a website called Nation Builder, which is just brilliant. And Nation Builder will take different types of structured data and then overlay it on top of each other. L2 will overlay it on top of a map and then give you breakdowns of, are you a likely gun owner? Are you a likely, Captain Crunch cereal buyer? It'll let you kind of see this audience is just slightly different than that audience.
That's fascinating. Okay, well, you were talking a little bit about social, kind of social media. You wrote about how influential social media has already proven itself for the campaign cycle this year. What lessons have those who are running for office learned, and are they doing? It feels to me like they're doing social media right this time, whereas before it felt kind of like an intrusion. Now it feels like they've kind of figured or cracked the code to a certain degree. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Jason. So the Obama campaign, again, in 2008 and 2012 were real early on social media, but what they did is kind of pave the way. They made mistakes and they had successes that are now being used to great effect by almost everybody in different ways. The best are probably Hillary Clinton and, again, Ted Cruz. The Clinton campaign does, in fact, they've learned a lot from the advertising industry. We've really, in the last 4 years, in the last 8 years, of course, we've really matured on the social web. The things that we understand how to do now are just leaps and bounds ahead of what we were doing in 2012. And now the Clinton campaign is using different social networks in different ways. So the content that is put on Snapchat is made for Snapchat. Mm-hmm. The content that's put on Instagram is made for Instagram. And what they learned is in 2008, she was seen as a little too tough. So they've kind of softened her image a little bit. And they've used Instagram and Snapchat in particular to really humanize Clinton and target not just millennials, but using SEO and kind of time-tested web tactics. If you understand how to acquire audience on the web, how to arbitrage and buy an audience using things like Outbrain, then you can get a sense of what the Clinton campaign has been doing. The real interesting thing that we're finding now that we're going to look into in the month of May is fake followers. So if you look at we've been doing, they're not the most beautiful graphs, but we've been just taking the Twitter data from all of the candidates, and you can look at Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Their lines start up here in terms of like how many followers they're adding every week, and they just go up more and more. You run them through follower analyzers to see, who has a profile image, who's tweeting kind of spammy stuff, or they both have incredibly high faker ratios. So we're going to look into did these campaigns buy followers? If so, when and why? This is fascinating.
Yeah, I can understand the why would be that, it raises your perception of being high profile and all that kind of stuff. What I wonder is if they did, in fact, buy followers and it's proven that they did, will that make much of a difference? Does the general, population actually care at all? Or, it's kind of too late at that point, maybe.
That would be one of the least controversial things to happen.
Right. Yes. This year, really anything goes. That would be at the bottom of the heap. And I think ultimately, Tech Republic readers, as well as, of course, fans of this show, might be interested in kind of what businesses or what people, who are in the business of possibly crunching big data and all that kind of stuff, what they can learn from these campaigns. Do you have a big takeaway as far as that is concerned, as far as where we are right now in the election cycle?
Yeah, that's kind of the hook that, look, there are some things in politics that are there's a million things that are just unique to politics. You're not going to experience these outside of politics, and they're not extrapolatable. But there's also a ton of stuff that you can extrapolate and you can find analogs to the business world. And in fact, I've spoken with Harper Reid a couple times. Harper was Obama's CTO in 2012, and he's a real down-to-earth guy. He's also a real nerd, a real techie. He was at Braintree, and he's really done. Look, he's on the nerd side of the fence when it comes to politics, and I think he'll probably talk to almost anybody about this stuff. But what he said is that, look, in order to run a campaign, it is all about management. It is, you have to have a good sense of people, and you have to have a good sense of how technology can add a qualitative benefit to what we're doing every day. And that's the same thing as starting a company or running a company. So our big takeaway, our big hook is that, we're not going to write the one story that will explain everything for you, but what we will do is show you a number of ways that every campaign has components that a business decision maker needs to pay attention to when running their business. Every campaign makes the same mistakes or will make mistakes and let you learn from those mistakes if you pay attention to how did they add team members? What kind of communication skills did they use? Some campaigns, like the Clintons, have used agile frameworks. I mean, they do scrums and stand-ups. It's really fascinating. They've learned from the tech world. And our big takeaway is that if you pay attention to the way not the crazy stuff that they say when they're trying to win office, but the way they manage their teams, you can learn a lot.
For sure. So definitely people should check out, especially the stuff that Dan Patterson is working on at Tech Republic along this beat, because you're certainly putting out a lot of content along this angle, and I imagine you will be all year. It's going to be an interesting year. I think some people are kind of exhausted of the election at this point, but
me too.
Right. But at the same time, it's a fascinating year to be taking a look at this stuff, because it really feels like technology and something that we feel like we've been so used to for so long. Like they're converging and they're colliding in a strange new unpredictable way right now. It's interesting to see kind of the direction that goes. So we have an email. Derek from Ottawa wrote into TNT@twit.tv about a comment that my good buddy and guest on last Friday's show, Ron Richards, made about BlackBerry. From a broad sense, Derek had a lot to say, but basically what he's saying here is that Ron's view on BlackBerry's dominance happens to match that in many tech circles, that BlackBerry began its descent in the mid-2000s, right around the time the iPhone was unveiled. Derek writes, the majority of people who use smartphones on buses and in businesses did not do so until the late 2000s, and of those who did, overwhelmingly used BlackBerries until late 2011 or 2012. The BlackBerry Pearl, for example, did not come out until 2010, and tons of people use that phone. He continues by saying, I'd like to point out that the first Android phone did not come out until 2008, and Android was not widely adopted for years later. So it seems like BlackBerry's fall from grace has a somewhat, a revisionist view in tech circles. It's easy to think that, what's happening now, began a long, long time ago. But I think what he's saying here, what Derek is saying here, is that it actually happened a lot sooner than people feel. How do you feel about this, Dan? I don't know. Did the modern smartphone era of iPhone and Android dominance, is that making it easy to rewrite kind of the influence of a company like BlackBerry?
Yeah, it might be, rose-colored glasses as well. I just remember liking the keyboard and hating everything else about my BlackBerry, and I think that it did help introduce the masses, the mainstream, to mobile devices with a plan that you had to pay an extra $30 a month for. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I think that they dug their own grave.
And I was kind of looking into kind of, the market share, market dominance, all that. 2010 really seemed to be the year that everything started, crashing down to earth. That at this point, that was 6 years ago. I think it's very easy, though, and I know that I feel like I've been kind of guilty of that, too, of being like, man, BlackBerry, since like the mid-2000s or whatever, thinking that once the iPhone comes along, it totally makes it irrelevant. And that's absolutely not true. It did take a couple of years for people to kind of, turn course. It's just when BlackBerry started to dive, it dove hard. And I think that's why people kind of have that revisionist stance on BlackBerry. I think we all agree, though, it would be great for BlackBerry to resurrect, because it was once something that a lot of people liked. Personally, I would love to see BlackBerry be a strong contender. I just don't know if it's going to happen. It feels like too little, too late at this point. So, TNT's fan of the day is at Andrew Les Miserables. I don't know. It's kind of like Les Miserables. Anyways, on Twitter, who checks out the show, quote, while waiting for class on my CarPlay Ready radio. There it is. I'm sure a lot of people do that. Show us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just record a video or take a picture of yourself or your setup and post it on Instagram, Google+, Twitter, or Facebook. and use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT, and we will find it. And send in some. We've gotten a little bit slower on that, but I would love to see how you guys are watching, so please do that. Finally, what better way to round out today's show than to show off what would have either, I imagine, Dan, either of us, the coolest kids on the block when we were younger, a gold-plated Nintendo Entertainment System that runs, no big deal, just $5,000. $5,000 gold-plated NES, kind of. I don't know.
You have to blow in the cartridge to make it work.
I would hope for $5,000 you wouldn't, but
Right.
I think you probably would to some degree, depending on the cartridge. Only 10 of these exist in reality, and it's actually, as you can tell, it's not a true NES. It's a analog NT version of the NES, but it's gold-plated, so it wins. And I don't know. I do wonder how heavy it is. But do you remember the old Legend of Zelda cartridge was gold like this? This is actually a celebration, a 30th anniversary of Legend of Zelda. And I thought that was cool. I don't know. Yeah, that's just me. I doubt it was worth as much as this. Dan Patterson, I'm really just super stoked to get you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me, especially to kind of fill in for the difficult to fill in for Megan Maroney. It was great having you here.
Man, I'm super stoked to be here, man. And I'm super proud of you for rocking the show. You were doing a great job, and I'm always happy to talk tech.
Excellent. So Dan Patterson, tell people kind of, I don't know, where people can find all the work that you're doing, social, all that kind of stuff online.
Everything tech is techrepublic.com. I also do a little journalism, and I just wrote a story, not tech related, but I spent some time in the Middle East and wrote a story about Daesh and migrant smuggling. So that's at the Contently Foundation. You can find it at danpatterson.com. It's a real long story, but fascinating stuff. But all things tech at Tech Republic.
Excellent. And at Dan Patterson on Twitter. Thanks so much, Dan. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you, man. Been great being with you.
All right. Take care.
See ya.
All right. And tomorrow, yes, Megan Maroney returns from the U.S. Capitol, and it'll be awesome to get her back on the set. So look forward to that. TNT records live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, 12 a.m. UTC at twit.tv/live. You can be a part of the show by emailing us, and I hope that you do, tnt@twit.tv. You can also leave us a short voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. You can find the show on Twitter. We are at Tech News Today TV. You can subscribe. Pretty much all the information that you need, I'll just go ahead and say, is at twit.tv/TNT. So head on over there and find it. And if you want to tweet at me personally, I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to our technical director today, Anthony Nielsen, and all the folks who help us produce this show every single day. And thanks to you for talking tech with us today. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye. Oh, I got no one to...